Hello, I am Sinner, and today I wanted to just do basically a small ad lib video where I just sort of covered a review of a book I read recently named Brave New World. Now, off the bat, this book compared to 1984, I think it's better because, 1984 really is, in my opinion, a product of its time. It depicts a world that can only really be best described as a 20th century totalitarian regime cranked up to 10, right? It's it's exactly what you would expect out of a regime of that time. And if someone were to make a dystopian novel about that time in that context, you would just get 1984. Whereas to me, it feels like Brave New World is more of an attempt to predict the future rather than a warning of the regimes of that time. And maybe it's because Aldous Huxley saw certain principles and beliefs being enacted, which would sort of become the undergirding belief system of the society in Brave New World. And that is obviously like this scientific, utilitarian, pleasure seeking society where the society is based around everyone being happy and everyone being sort of contented with their base needs rather than it being about truth or beauty or love or any sort of higher ideal rather than happiness. And this isn't like happiness in the sense of like genuine fulfillment. It's happiness in the sense of base pleasure. So everyone in the society is perpetually either working, doing drugs, mainly soma, or having sex, watching porn, or playing a sport, right? And the whole thing is that basically you're born not of a womb, but in a test tube. You're a test tube baby, and you're born predetermined into a class with a predetermined intelligence, with predetermined physical characteristics. You work, goon, and then die, essentially. Um, and everyone dies at 60 as well, and they're all artificially kept young up until 60 to hide the fact that they're aging. Yeah, I think it's an interesting book. I think it's also kind of funny that you have this character, Mustafa Mond, who can acknowledge that the society is a lie, essentially, and that everything that it promotes or believes in is untrue, but it doesn't matter because it's all in the service of this happiness principle, which I think is kind of important to acknowledge, right? Because, you know, there's still this, I guess you could say, social attitude in Western countries that everyone is seeking the truth and that everyone is being truthful. But that's not necessarily the case. There are so many worldviews out there where lying is morally permissible because the highest value isn't truth, right? The reason that in our society lying is considered immoral is because truth is considered a moral thing, right? But if you live in a society where happiness is the ultimate highest value, then being truthful or untruthful doesn't really matter, right? Yeah, I also found it interesting that they necessarily added in a faux religion or a faux spirituality in the sense of that like orgy porgy ritual thing. I think that's kind of interesting because I do think it's true that some people have a probably can't say the word. Um, some people are naturally more likely to be religious, I feel, and by everything in the society is like set up in such a way where people's natural instincts will push them back into the system. And if you have like sort of religious or spiritual tendencies, right, then there's already a system set up for you to be sort of accepted back into the fold. So they have a pseudo religion for the society as well, which didn't exist in 1984 from my memory. They had state enforced atheism in that society. Again, that's from memory, so I could be wrong. I also found it funny that Mustafa Mon believed in God, but I found it funny that he he would believe in God and he would be like, "Oh yeah, by the way, it's not real science what we're doing. It's all fake science." And then he would tell John the Savage like five like on the other page, he'd be like, "Yeah, but this is a scientific society, don't you know, John? And because it's a scientific society, we have to do this." So even he sort of, even if it's not explicitly said, is a contradictory character where he's either lying or he's internalized contradictions. And yeah, I think the plot at the end with John the Savage was kind of interesting, where you had this thing where he goes and works on the farm that he's trying to build up, and he's trying to escape the society, and um, basically his way of life was so alien, it was outside of the comprehension of the regular Brave New World people, the regular English folk. And they sort of like tried to interpret it within the societal framework instead of accept it for what it is. So they they basically turned his self flagellation whip, his like whipping ritual thing, into like some sort of erotic play thing. And then they obviously at the end of the book, spoilers, they sexually abuse him and use drugs to do so, and then he ends his own life, though it's not explicitly said. What else is interesting about the book? I have some notes here. Oh yes, the class consciousness and the quote unquote conditioning. I found this interesting where I love the fact that they had like a reverse class consciousness, because in that society everyone's brought up with class consciousness conditioning, but it's brought up so that way they become satisfied in their own class. And the reason I find this funny is because like when you read about Marxist literature and like you hear about Marxists, they always talk about class consciousness and how everyone has to realize that the workers are the same. They're all the same and they all have the same enemy, which, I agree with in a sense, because I agree that the elites that run this society aren't good people. But I always find it funny how, like, when you look at the history of the USSR, they immediately go, okay, we need a vanguard party. We need to have a separation between working class people and the educated people who are the vanguard party. And then we'll lead the working class. You know, I don't know. I drew a connection there. Maybe I'm just like completely reaching. But yeah, that's something I saw. Let's see, what else? Yeah, I heard that in the book, um, there was like, this was from like a random source, so I don't know how trustworthy it is. They said that there was basically pedophilia in the book, but I didn't really see it. I don't know where it was, but they do have like teaching the kids sexuality at a young age and encouraging sexual promiscuity and treating everyone as a sexual object, but I didn't see any of the pedophilia stuff. But that does remind me, though, one thing which I found interesting, which I think is kind of applicable to modern society, is how in Brave New World, the society is set up in such a way that no one has any emotional attachments to anything. So, if you don't have a parent, you don't have any parents, you don't have any children, you don't have any romantic partner that you love. Free, quote unquote, free love is a thing, but or promiscuity is a better word. It's not free love. At least the hippies thought they were loving the people, but this is more like you use people for sexual objects. Yeah, but I think it's interesting that the society goes to such an intense lengths to make sure that nobody has any emotional attachment to anything. And I think this is a good manipulation tactic, right? Because if you don't care about your fellow people around you or anything besides your own pleasure, then you're very easy to manipulate because there's nothing like grounding you to reality. And what I was going to say about it being applicable to modern society is it's sort of like the epitome of atomization in Brave New World, where, today we complain about how atomized society is and how, everyone's sort of doing their own thing in their own room. And, I'm no different. I'm like that a lot. But this takes it to its radical extreme where no one really cares for anyone besides themselves. And it's enabled by the state and encouraged by the ideology because if no one's giving you any pleasure, there's not really any use for them, right? You can't really have a bond with someone. I'm going to check my notes one more time, see if there's anything else that I remember that was sort of interesting. Um, Not really. I do think one other thing, actually, I will say this. One other thing which I thought was novel about the Soma was how the society, because it's all based around pleasure principle stuff, it's a problem if you're unhappy and it's a problem if you're thinking, right? So they know people are eventually going to become uncomfortable with the society. And the way they deal with that is by medicating the people, right? And then in modern society, I think there is a lot of people who aren't actually depressed. They're just refusing that it's almost natural for them not to be comfortable in the type of society that's been built up, this hyper industrial, atomized, pleasure seeking, basically godless society. And there's like a natural knee jerk reaction to that. And I think in my country, Australia, it's something like half the people are medicated, half the people are on drugs, which is insane to think about. Half of the country is medicated with something. And I think a lot of people aren't actually mentally ill. I think a lot of people are naturally reacting to the society and and I mean it's a profit for the pharmaceutical companies. But um, again, it's profitable for the government because they can keep everyone sort of placid and content by basically drugging them into submission, which is a pretty novel control tactic. And it's kind of interesting because you see it in society. And I'll finish on this because there's not really much else for me to say about the book. But I think when I was reading it and I was talking to my friends about it, I'd be like, "Oh, there's this aspect of the book where the society is like very promiscuous and all this," and then all my friends would go, "But isn't that just like today? Isn't that just our society?" And I would explain single aspects of the book. And I think this is why I like it way more, is because I think between 1984 and Brave New World, um, Western society in general is much more likely to move in the direction of Brave New World. Um, yeah, but that's all. I am Sinner, and thank you for listening.